Wernher von Braun, the Soviets' loss. Interview with a member of the team that escorted Wernher von Braun out of Germany. In the crush and chaos of the final days of Hitler, when Allied forces were overrunning Germany, U.S. government officials were determined that German rocket science and the scientists who developed it would not fall into Soviet hands. The top prize was Wernher von Braun, the man who was responsible for the V-2 rocket that had terrorized Britain late in the war. During those last days of the Third Reich, von Braun's own goal was the same as that of his former enemies. When Hitler came to power in 1933, there had been a mass exodus of intellectual talent to France and the United States. Wernher von Braun had stayed in Germany, joining the National Socialist Aviation Corps and other Nazi organizations at a scientific complex at a small fishing village named Peenemünde. On the Baltic Sea, von Braun and other scientists conducted sophisticated rocket research. By the early 1940s, they had already produced early designs for a two-stage intercontinental ballistic missile, as well as the first models of the A-4 rocket, which would eventually become the V-2. By 1944, the A-4 was being mass-produced at the metalwork concentration camp with slave labor, and the Germans used them in combat. Joseph Goebbels' propaganda department renamed the A-4 the Vengeance Weapon 2, or simply the V-2. With the Soviet army driving toward Berlin, 500 top rocket scientists were moved west under heavy German guard. Von Braun managed to find an abandoned mine in the Harz Mountains to hide data about the rockets. Convinced that his future scientific work depended on his own capture by the Americans, von Braun successfully made his way to a village in Bavaria near the Austrian border. He sent his younger brother Magnus, a personal assistant, to find the Allies on a bicycle borrowed from a local innkeeper. Magnus located Americans in a nearby valley, and the scientists quickly surrendered. Under the Yalta Agreement, the Soviets would receive the entire region surrounding the scientific complex, and they were rapidly advancing. U.S. troops had to act quickly. With only a few days to spare, they managed to ship out the V-2 parts, records, and scientists. For the next 21 years, von Braun would work with the U.S. Army in peacetime space missions and in the development of the ICBM. The work of von Braun and other German scientists became essential in American rocket research. The man who had developed weapons, had terrorized the Allies, now turned his work into the invention of the Saturn V. At the center of the Cold War scientific research in the 1950s was a race with the Soviet Union in the development of sophisticated weaponry and the step toward the control of space technology. If von Braun and the records of his research had not been picked up by U.S. troops in the rush of the Allies to Berlin, the Soviets would have inherited a wealth of talent and information that could have made a dramatic difference in the progress of the Cold War strategic and diplomatic activity. In those few days, as the enemy shifted from the defeated Nazi war machine to the Soviet threat, the United States captured a significant weapon. And here is the excerpt from the interview with Dr. Richard Porter. It was getting dark and we had been going all day. The station was full of displaced people who had been released from the camps in the neighborhood. We went to see the station master, but he said that he didn't have a locomotive, but he would give us the first one that came in. After some time, one came in, but it had been a busted injector and was just limping along. There was a hill outside Mulhausen. Finally, a locomotive came in, but it was the smallest I have ever seen, and it could only put about half of our cars up that hill. Von Braun wanted to bring over a complete operating group, as I would have too, in his place. That included draftsmen, tool makers. Being a project manager myself, I knew exactly what he was talking about. He was right, and he ended up with a group of about 500, maybe even 600. I went off to Paris to the Tolf by Jeep. He told me, "Oh no, that's way too many people." He knew that his higher-ups would never accept such a number. There were weeks of debates and arguments with the people back in Washington, and also when the British wanted V-2s and a launch crew for test launchings. Certainly plans to ship a number of the Peenemünde people to the United States did not materialize overnight. I found an interesting one.
What?
Einstein's Modest Suggestion, 1939. A letter of Albert Einstein to President Franklin Roosevelt recommending U.S. funding of nuclear research. Leo Szilard, like many other foreign-born physicists in the United States, had fled European fascism. along with M. Joliet in France. Szilard had done extensive research on chain reaction in uranium as one of the discoverers of neutron emission of uranium. Aware that Germany was conducting similar secret research at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, Szilard was certain that they were developing an atomic bomb. Fearing what would happen if Germany developed an atomic weapon, he urged his close friend Albert Einstein to convince the American government to support nuclear research. On August 2, 1939, a month before Germany invaded Poland, Einstein wrote a letter to President Roosevelt recommending that the United States fund nuclear research, stating that it could result in extremely powerful bombs made of uranium. Einstein said that his recommendation was based on the research both Szilard and Enrico Fermi, who was the first scientist actually to produce nuclear fission in the laboratory, a research triumph that won him the 1938 Nobel Prize for Physics. Based on Einstein's letter, President Roosevelt authorized the government study on the possibilities of launching the research program recommended by the scientists. Ironically, Roosevelt decided to proceed with the work on December 6, 1941. The next day, the Japanese warplanes bombed Pearl Harbor. Under the leadership of General Leslie Groves and a brilliant nuclear physicist from the University of California, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project, collaboration of American science and industry carried out under the direction of the U.S. Army, was begun at Los Alamos, New Mexico, a remote location near Santa Fe. Oppenheimer gathered scientists from the most prestigious universities in the United States, including the University of Chicago, Columbia University, and his own University of California. He also recruited several British and Canadian scientists. U.S. Army Corps engineers built power stations, factories, foundries, blast furnaces, steelworks, hospitals, laboratories, and housing at Los Alamos. The project involved more than 200,000 people and the cost of the United States $2 million. It feels like not a lot, but I guess at the time that was probably a lot. Yeah. It was conducted in complete secrecy, not only from the enemy, but from the American public. From the research came the weapon that exploded with such ferocity over the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. Leo Szilard, the scientist who suggested to Einstein that he approach President Roosevelt about developing a bomb, later became one of the most ardent spokespeople against the military use of nuclear weapons. Einstein himself, fearful that the work would lead to nuclear conflagration, later took full responsibility for the consequences of his approach to the president, calling it the greatest mistake of his life. For the U.S. military, the suggestion of Szilard and Einstein had been one of the greatest fortuitous occurrences in history, even if for both of them it later became an aching source of guilt. And here is the actual letter that Albert Einstein wrote to FDR. Some recent work by E. Fermi and L. Szilard, which has been communicated to me in the manuscript, leads me to expect that the element uranium may be turned into a new and important source of energy in the immediate future. Certain aspects of the situation which has arisen seem to call for the watchfulness and, if necessary, quick action on the part of the administration. I believe, therefore, that it is my duty to bring the attention the following facts and recommendations. In the course of the last 4 months, it has been made probable, through the work of Joliet in France as well as Fermi and Szilard in America, that it may become possible to set up a nuclear chain reaction in a large mass of uranium, by which vast amounts of power and large quantities of new radium-like elements would be generated. Now it appears almost certain that this could be achieved in the immediate future. This new phenomenon would also lead to the construction of bombs, and is conceivable, though much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may thus be constructed. A new single bomb of this type carried by boat or exploded in a port might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory. However, such bombs might very well prove to be too heavy for transportation by air. The United States has only very poor ores of uranium in moderate quantities. There is some good ore in Canada and the former Czechoslovakia, while the most important source of uranium is the Belgian Congo. In view of this situation, you may think it is desirable to have some permanent contact maintained between the administration and the group of physicists working on chain reactions in America. One possible way of achieving this might be for you to entrust with this task a person who has your confidence and who could perhaps serve in an unofficial capacity. His task might comprise the following: to approach the government departments, keep them informed of further development, and put forward recommendations for government action, giving particular attention to the problem of securing a supply of uranium ore for the United States. And B, to speed up experimental work which is at present being carried on within the limits of the budgets of university laboratories, by providing funds, if such funds be required, through his contacts with private persons who are willing to make contributions for this cause, and perhaps also by obtaining the cooperation of the industrial laboratories which have the necessary equipment. I understand that Germany has actually stopped the sale of uranium from the Czechoslovakia mines, which she has taken over. That she should have taken such early action might perhaps be understood on the ground that the son of the German Undersecretary of State, von Weizsäcker, is attached to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin, where some of the American work on uranium is now being repeated. Yours truly, A. Einstein. That was interesting, given the context of, everything that has since transpired and everything that's currently happening in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. The world's a fickle bitch.